Well, hello, sausages. I have no idea. I'm in a really funny mood. I'm finally feeling better. Oh yeah, oh yeah. I'm finally feeling better. And today we're going to talk about raven magic. And we're going to touch on ravens and crows because they have similar but not the same energies. And I wanted to do this in the following way. We're going to talk a little bit about ravens, and particularly ravens. There'll be a little bit of crow bouncing on in there. Energies in a very general sense. There is a lot of mythology surrounding ravens and crows across cultures, across time, and therefore if I tried to cover everything we would be here all day, literally. And while some of you may not have issues with it, some of you will. I'll be like, get out of my face. And therefore we're going to focus on a little bit of lore and myth in a very general sense, and then we're going to sort of move into a more Celtic sense, which of course is the path that I follow, and then we're going to talk about my feelings and thoughts and interpretations, things of that nature concerning raven magic. We will tie into the Morrigan towards the tail end, of course, naturally. What do you expect? But it's a really fascinating subject that has come up time and time again, obviously for me, and I really wanted to address it and talk about it and really sort of delve into some of the myth and lore, which is about ravens by themselves, raven energy. It's not so much totem animal, but you know, raven energy that all can connect with, although some will have a raven totem. And I've been asked a lot about things to do with the Morrigan and crows and ravens recently, which we're going to talk about in the tail end of the video. So we're going to have quotes, we're going to have show and tell, I'm going to have props. It's going to be a high video. It's going to be me being nuts. Okie dokie. So the first bit of information is from Ted Andrews' Animal Speak, which is really worth having a read if you haven't. And I'm going to read you bits and pieces from different books because I think it's a really great way for giving you a bouncing off point. Like, say, right, well, where do I start getting to know? Because, you know, I can share my feelings and things, but this is a basis of information, which I think is really helpful. So, from Ted Andrews. In animal symbolism, crows and ravens are often interchangeable, and we are going to touch on that a bit with the fact that the imagery of crow and raven in like physical symbolism is often interchanged. If one is associated with a characteristic, the other often adopts the same characteristic. However, in some aspects they differ. Crows, for example, represent those who like to be around people more, and ravens prefer solitude. Both share the characteristic of vision and prediction, meaning prescience and precognition. They are also intuitive and clever, going hand in hand with foresight. The Romans certainly believed they had these powers, since birds were vital to the practice of augury, divining the future from the flight patterns of birds. It's fascinating, augury, it really is. An augur type of priest would be told the flight patterns, and from that he would divine the messages. So I've had a bit of that happen to me recently, where I start seeing certain birds and flying over. We saw 4 swans flying over when I went to visit my sister, and I may be moving about a bit, you have to forgive me, and drinking water possibly. So, you know, that was fascinating. There's obviously a lot of mythology surrounding crows and ravens. For instance, in Greek mythology, Apollo instructed a crow to watch over his pregnant lover. In this myth, crows were white, but when the crow brings bad tidings about his lover, the crow's feathers turn black. This too happens in the case of Odin's ravens, which isn't in the Ted Andrews book, but I made that note, that when the ravens brought bad news, thought in memory, brought bad news, their feathers turn black, and it's worth remembering that. And I'm going to insert here like a little bit of modern culture, I guess, from Game of Thrones, which is dark wings, dark words, which is the ravens being used as messengers, and usually in that sense bad messengers, and it's worth just keeping that in mind for the future. I'm going to skip that bit for now. Right. In Europe, since ravens can be taught to speak and have such a complex vocabulary of their own, they are symbolically connected to wisdom and prophecy. But in Europe from Christian times, ravens have several strikes against them. Black being seen as a negative colour, whatever, you know. Ravens are carrion eaters and they have a symbiotic relationship with man's oldest enemy, the wolf. Which, also bear in mind, in Western traditions, they were said to represent, in Western Christian traditions, they were said to represent darkness, death, destructiveness and evil. Both witches and the devil were said to be, by Christians, to take the form of a raven. They are obviously associated with Morrigan and Morgana Le Fay, which we're going to touch on in a bit, as well as the Celtic god Bran, whose name means raven, and we will touch on that in a bit as well. Irish and Scottish banshees could take the form of ravens as they cried above a roof, an omen of death below. Raven magic. In many cultures, the raven represents the deep magic, the mystery of the unknown, death, transformation, creation, healing, wisdom, protection and prophecy, symbolic of both the sun and the moonless night. So in other traditions, there is the raven stealing fire from, is it Native American? I think it is. And trickster elements in other things. Now, here I'm going to say this is a very generalised overview to start with, and then we're going more into Celtic. If you follow a certain path, a certain different path, if you're more interested in the Native American, if you're more interested in the Norse mythology, then it's well worth going further and deeper into those particular stories and really investigating. To be honest, it's worth doing that no matter what you're doing, because then you are getting an overarching feeling, energy and information about raven energy yourself. The raven is the birth-giving light in the centre of our galaxy and the black hole in which the centre of our universe, to which we are all travelling to our eventual extinction. Raven is the fatal touch of the Kiliach, is that right, Kiliach, in winter, the wisdom of Odin, the vessel of prophecy given to a seer. The Hebrides would give a child his first drink from the skull of a raven to give the child powers of prophecy and wisdom, and the protector of the Western Isles. In the mythos of Bran the Blessed, which I have a video on already, his head was buried in London, and as long as the ravens are in the Tower of London, it is said that London will not fall. Interesting mythology surrounding ravens, especially in the western parts of the world. There's a great deal of dual-edged swords. Remember that too. And sort of duality of energy and myth. I have fled in the shape of a raven of prophetic speech, tales then. Remember, there's always something cleverer than yourself, Merlin from this Gallagher movie. Right, magic we'll talk about last. Now we're going to talk about that duality, that symbolism, that deep connection to the deep magic, the fear, the power, what makes a raven energy, why are we so obsessed with it, you know, even in modern times. And there's sort of this double interpretation, one being quite an evil, negative thing, and another being of mystery and magic and prophecy and shape-shifting and seer energy. And I thought the best way to illuminate this, to start with, is through the power of tarot and oracle cards. I've got a few that basically represent the image of, and crow and raven here is used interchangeably, it's a little bit annoying in that sense. But yeah, so let's start with the Wild Unknown. So the Wild Unknown uses a raven, I believe, for the Hierophant. Sat on a key, calling out, talons around the key, wings tucked in, stationary. Key struck by a rainbow-coloured lightning bolt, associated with 5, a very spiritual number of the self and the 5 elements. Also worth noting there are 5 species of crow. The Hierophant is often considered to have a direct line to the universe and the divine, such as with Odin's ravens, as well as being a teacher, a counsellor, the messenger, as well as the fact that he is holding the key, which the flash of illumination is attached to, rather than it being the raven himself. His open beak speaks of him delivering the messages of the call to attention, to pay attention to messages from the divine. So here we have Raven as a facilitator, a messenger of the messages of the divine, and there is a really beautiful I think is it in the There's a really beautiful turn of phrase whereby that it's believed that crows and ravens are apart from time, that they see the world as it was, as it is, and as it will be in a sort of the fluidity of motion, that they are not of this world, and that's a little bit where the fear comes from as well, and that they have this shape-shifting nature, so associated with the Morrigan and things, of course, and witches, and as we've already mentioned. And therefore they are tapped into the messages of the divine, of things that were and things that will be, and their energy can be utilised. Sorry, the camera does like to fuzz if I move too much. Their energy can be utilised in wisdom and prophecy and divination, and that's part and parcel of why I wanted to use the cards. Another, perhaps more modern showing of the fear comes from the Oracle of the Shapeshifters, whereby the Raven does not have their own card. They do show up in the Black Cat, traditionally associated with bad luck, and in this card it's very Halloween-y, and they're not even, you know, the main messenger of this card. This is about being afraid of loneliness, angst, self-pity. Let's see. Messages of a negative kind, basically. Yeah. Now, ravens and crows as well do show up in modern sort of versions of that negative symbolism that we talked about. We talked about it coming in through history as a fear in Christianity, and then being a witch is familiar and being associated with witchcraft and things of that nature. And that sort of fear sort of transcends into modern interpretations, and you'll find them in horror movies. You'll find them all associated with Halloween, which, depending on how you feel about Halloween, Samhain, you understand or you don't understand the meanings. Their deep interconnectedness to Samhain shows the duality of how, in fact, ravens and crows sort of embark on modern consciousness and coming from the threads of history. On one side, we have this. They're scary, they're present in horror movies, you know, you can see them in like horror games. They were in, you know, famously in Diablo. They show up in a lot of horror movies, and there's that other edgy, worrisome, frightening element where people associate them with fear. And then if you are on the other side of things, where you're like associating Samhain with New Year, new beginnings, messages from the divine, being the veil being thin so you can receive messages more easily, more frequently, I guess, and then the element of death and rebirth, so that crows could be associated with life, death and rebirth, as well as past, present and future, and they then have that element. Hello. I look into my crystal ball of crows. I love this. I'm just going to take any opportunity to play with this, to be honest. This is just gorgeous. So, you know, depending on how you feel about it, you either are super excited to see all the crow raven imagery around right now, in the Northern Hemisphere anyway, or it sort of fills you with this sort of ominous sense of dread. And another, interestingly enough, in the Polina Tarot, the raven and crow are in the sword. Start again. They are in the sword deck. The word out of my head. Anyway, but they are also sort of secondary to swans, and there's sort of like this. The swan is the hope and the strength, and then the crows and the ravens are the dark bit, and it's a bit really. And so you've got like the Nine of Swords, which is about you know, fear and nightmares and illusions, and you have this swirl of ravens in vortex and fear, and then you have the Seven of Swords, which is all about the trickster, lies, deceptions, in which he's half crow wearing a crow, and you know, or I think they're pretty much crows in this one. And then of course you have the Ten of Swords, whereby they're all death. And you know, that, so even in some witchy tarot, the symbolism of the death things is sort of used as sort of like this fearful message. And my favourite tarot image that I want to show you right now is from the Mariel Tarot, of which there are two of note. And I'm going to have to find them separately because I want to read you this information, because the Mariel Tarot has a way of putting things, and it's so deep, so majestic, so powerful and so primal, and goes back beyond our modern interpretations of things, that it really is something worth embarking in. So first and foremost, now I absolutely love the sevens in the Mariel Tarot, is the Seven of Swords. Ravens and crows are quite frequently associated with swords, because in the tarot, swords are associated with air, and ravens are obviously creatures of air. So Raven steals the sun. So this actually touches on that. In the beginning there was total darkness. There's quite a lot of information here, so bear with me. Raven, who had existed since the beginning of time, was tired of fumbling about in the dark, and learnt of an old man who kept a great treasure of all the light in the universe contained in a little box, concealed within many boxes. He vowed to steal the light. He found the house of the old man and his daughter who lived with him. He waited by the river, and when the daughter came to collect water, he transformed himself into a single hemlock needle and dropped himself into the river just as she was dipping in her water basket. She drank, swallowed the needle, it slithered into her warm belly, and he transformed himself into a baby. After a long time, Raven emerged into the world again as a human infant. Even though his grandfather loved him, he forbade him to touch the treasure box. The Raven child begged, and finally the old man yielded, lifting the light from the box and throwing it to his grandchild. As the warm light came to him, and the child transformed suddenly into a huge shadowy bird, wings spread, ready for flight, and when the light reached him, he captured it in his beak, and this is how he escaped the night and light came into the universe. This is Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, or Raven stealing the sun and giving it to man. To Plato, the ability to move on your own accord is proof of the existence of life and an immortal soul. think we are all born with a soul, a divine and perfect soul, but when you have free will and the ability to intentionally direct yourself, you will become fully responsible for who you are, your creativity and your highest potential. So there's an element in there of cunning and of trickery, and then it's a Prometheus story basically. It's incredibly beautiful. Okie dokie. And again, it sort of has that duality of, was it a good thing? Was it a selfish thing? And you're asked to really go in depth. And the journey with this tarot deck is something else. It's just beyond. And this is probably my favourite. This is the Queen of Swords. Hugin and Munin, correct me, Nordic people, were the eyes of Odin and his companions. Every day at dawn he sent them over Midgard, and at dinner time they returned with news. Their names have always meant thought and memory. Odin always worried one day they would not come back, but they always did. This is a continuation of the idea in 7 of Raven stealing the swords. After Raven steals the sun, life or fire, he eats it and holds it in his body. Just like each living being contains a little divine shard of life force, each of us has eaten a little bit of the sun and hold it in our bodies, keeping it safe during its exile from God or deity during the long dark night. Odin's fears are unfounded, and in the morning the sun always is released from the cave and rises again. So here sits Hugin and Munin on the Tree of Life, Yggdrasil, protecting the spark of life with them as we all do, reporting back to Odin at night as we all do. As souls in exile then freed again at death, we experience this world through the eyes of separation and individuals. The face of the Queen of Swords is here in the landscape. She is everything and each one, communicating and experiencing each other in states of soul and curricular separation and togetherness. Mundanely or profanely, this Queen provides an environment where one can use their minds, think, understand and gain knowledge, and so on. Intellectual pursuit as well. And I could probably make whole videos just talking about those, so I'm not, but it does show the image, the element, the understanding. And the reason I've decided to pick tarot and the way that tarot and oracle have chosen to show ravens is for a very particular reason. Tarot is divining the unknown. It is one of the ways and tools in which we use to seek truth, to delve into symbolism and magic and the psyche, to discover things about ourselves and help ourselves grow. And therefore tarot and the imagery which we best connect with, we use and feel is important to us in terms of tarot decks and oracle decks, therefore show a little bit about how we interact with certain energies and how we connect in our psyche to the energies of certain things, and in this case being ravens and the world of magic. So I said we would talk, and I think we will talk a little bit about the Celtic stuff, so we're going to read from a little bit from Woodfield's book as a point of reference for everybody. The raven is connected to magic, prophecy and the underworld. Ravens are highly intelligent, having the largest brain of any bird species, and are highly mischievous. Okay, let's have some I love the energies of ravens. I think they are naughty as, and every time I go out with cameras and video recorders, they all hide. They do this to me on purpose. They're like, no. And I'm like, I've had it happen when I'm like with people and they notice and they're like, that you're being trolled. And I'm like, yes I know. Yes I know. And that's just how they are. They're so naughty and so secretive. In the wild, they live 10 to 15 years, although in captivity they have lived up to the age of 40. Larger than their crow cousins, they have a 4-foot wingspan and are roughly the size of a hawk. Ravens play the wise trickster in many myths, and wild ravens often enjoy playing tricks and mimicking the sounds they hear. Ravens in Olympic National Park in Washington State have been reported to mimic the sounds of the auto-flush urinals in the park's bathrooms. They are opportunistic omnivores, eating anything they can scavenge, and will have been found on ancient battlefields scavenging for meat. Since the Celts believed that eating something meant you were taking on its spirit, ravens believed to carry the souls of the dead into the otherworld. And then it talks about Odin, which we've already discussed, as well as Bran, which we've already discussed. Ravens warned Lugh of the approach of the Fomorians, again fulfilling the role as a messenger. Ravens are connected to prophecy and can aid divination. The raven is connected with the sun and the moon, both in Native American and Celtic legends, making it a bird of spiritual illumination. The raven was totem of Lugh, the Celtic sun god, as we have already seen, and as Morrigan is a sun goddess when she appears as Mecha and Ain. And again, very much the same for crows, but ravens we're focusing on. Okie dokie doke. So that's just a little bit of a point of reference before we talk about it in sort of a more Celtic perspective. So associated with both, well, it's associated with, the raven is associated with a lot of gods and goddesses, and as you can see, Lugh, Bran, Morrigan are just 3 examples, as well as Morgana Le Fay, and that's another interesting connection as to whether or not Morgan Le Fay's true identity as divine is sort of symbolic in the relationship with ravens. Even in modern interpretations of Morgana Le Fay, like in the BBC Merlin, she was seen using a raven for messages. Excuse me while I have a drink. Which again sort of hints at the messenger, at the energy of the raven being used as direct line to the gods and goddesses, and perhaps as a symbol of Morgana Le Fay's real divinity behind the Christianization of the myth. Also, it said that she had an army of trickster fae that could shapeshift into ravens. So, I think we are moving now into me talking about what I want to talk about, given a raven energy. So, I think that working with raven energy and perhaps a totem, or perhaps in terms of magic, because it can be used in forms of healing magic and protective magic. It is said that in healing magic, both Celtic and Druid healers and Native American shaman use raven spirit for healing, especially long distance. When doing a healing circle for an absent friend, the energy is sent in the form of a raven. If working directly, raven feathers can be used to stroke against the body, collecting and drawing out negative energy, which will be shaken out and later cleansed. A raven is considered a very powerful medicine. The ravens are also used for protection because they will mob their enemies if they come near the nest. So those are just some examples of magic that can be utilised using raven energies. For me as well, I think raven would be a fascinating energy to call on in times of divination and personal prophecy and wisdom, for all the sort of aforementioned reasons. However, I think that for me personally, my relationship with ravens and crows are so intrinsically linked to the Morrigan that I think it represents something very interesting, and I really want to sort of delve into that a little bit here at the end. First and foremost, I've had a lot of people say to me, you know, I've seen a lot of crows, is this the Morrigan? And I am always a bit like, well, there are a lot of, the crow and the raven have a lot of energies. It's not just one goddess. And to just base that on a single point of information that this would be the Morrigan because you've seen crows seems a little bit shot in the dark to me. Ravens and crows live. They are, you know, they are not just symbolic messages from the divine. They have to live. They have to be of this world as well as of the other world. And it's not necessarily a message to see a crow. As it happens, ravens and crows were the last animal to show up in my visualization and in actuality. The last. The first was the wolf. And given the symbiotic relationship that crows have with wolves, whereby crows follow wolves and pick off the carcasses, it made a lot more sense to me to happen that way. And it's obviously it's how it's happened to me. But it's basically the symbiotic relationship coming full circle. We're talking Ouroboros, we're talking life and death and rebirth, the full cycle. And ravens and crows were the last animal to show up in my life with regards to coming to an understanding that I was the Morrigan's daughter. And it's often picked on as an animal of the Morrigan because it's the most frequently used in symbolism and artwork. Like you don't see people going, I've been seeing a lot of eels. Therefore I think the Morrigan is calling, and yet the eel is just as relevant to the Morrigan as the crow or the raven energy is. You can be getting messages from crows and ravens in terms of augury, in bird divination, in terms of interpreting messages from the divine without it being a god or goddess. It can be plenty of other gods and goddesses, as we've looked at. It's associated with Kali. In Indian tradition, it's associated with Odin. They're associated with Hecate. They're associated with Apollo. There's a multitude, and they show up in every. I'm pretty sure in every denomination. They're just such spiritually powerful animals that they do show up. For me, I think working with raven energy is something that can be associated with a certain element of the Morrigan. And this is a very important and very scary element of working with the Morrigan for some people. I think that ravens and crows represent our fears and the need for shadow work on our fears. They have that duality. So if you are you are thinking of them in terms of a bad omen, they may be representing your fear of one or the other of these things, possibly. They can represent our psyche's fear of intellect of other than our own, the trickster being made a fool of, and that comes from a place of pride. And that can be the intellect of creatures other than humans, because obviously ravens are shown to be hugely intelligent creatures. Excuse me. There are videos all over the internet about them seeking out humans' help when they need it. The porcupine quill one is one such one, and them solving puzzles is well known. They're incredibly intelligent, and there's somewhere this disconnect in modern human consciousness about animals having this range of intelligence, like it's somehow a threat or something. I think it can represent a fear of prophetic power and the unknown and the unseen. I think it can represent a fear of death. I think it can represent a fear of female power, particularly in terms of the witch archetype and female involvement in warlike goddesses in such as the Morrigan. I think it's really interesting to really look at these ravens, this energy, this purpose within terms of our own shadow work, in terms of things which are about us. And it's receiving messages for good or ill from the gods. And it's not just about shadow work, but I think that the raven has come to show us the failings that we have as human beings and to draw those things into our attention, because they can be worked on, they can be improved. You can seek, you can try and be the best person that you personally can be. And I was thinking about this in terms of crystal work. And I was thinking about how quite frequently it's like with the Morrigan, and you'll get certain crystals I said this crystal is the Morrigan and this colour is the Morrigan, and you get that with ravens and crows and things as well. The traditional crystal quite often are the black crystals, and there's a reason and purpose for this. They have that protective energy, they have a scrying energy in terms of obsidian in particular, like scrying mirrors. However, for me, I think there are two crystals to me that speak of raven energy and will help you connecting with raven energy if you so wish to. The first is smoky quartz. Now this is quite a dark smoky quartz, and this one's a little bit lighter. So I love smoky quartz. I think it's a beautiful crystal in terms of divination, of purification, of receiving divine messages. And interestingly enough, this is the crystal that I would most associate with wolf energy as well. That symbiotic relationship. Now the second crystal that I most associate with raven energy, and indeed the Morrigan energy right now, is labradorite. Labradorite is a, jumping off my hand, getting down my bra, crystal, honestly, not in front of people. Right, it's a stone of the shaman, of the mystical, of the divine, of the otherness that I so associate with raven energy. If you move, you get different reflections and refractions of light. You get messages, you get symbols, you get something of the deep psyche within labradorite. It's something beneath the surface which is more than it appears, which is truly what raven energy is all about. So I think we've covered everything that I want to cover. I really was aware of not letting this video run on for too long, and it's already quite long as it is. But for me, raven energy and working with raven energy outside of all particular branches of mythos and mythology, which you should tailor to whichever path you're following, raven energy can be interacted with on a more abstract level, and should be if this is something that you are key, if you're seeing a lot of ravens. And right now they're freaking everywhere. This is part of the reason I was doing the research, is part of the reason I was prodded to do the video. It's because they are literally everywhere. They are messages of the divine, they are messages of prophecy and wisdom. They are sit up and take notice. Sit up and take notice. And I feel that their energy right now is really strong and worth investigating, and therefore I wanted to make a video about it. So that's it for this video. Many blessings.